Okay, thank you for staying with us on the program. Let's get the second discussion on the program this morning quickly. On the road, I'm joined by two gentlemen. I'll begin from my immediate left, Reverend Olu Martins, the human rights activist. Thank you for coming to the program.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And next to him is a lawyer, Peter Ejiofor. We also want to appreciate you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to be using much of your expertise this morning, especially from the human rights angle. Thank you again, we appreciate it. So Reverend, let's begin with you and I had conversations here about the Endsars protest and all of the angles, all of the drama that came with it. But today, so much has happened between October of 2020 and now. Just yesterday, for instance, those persons who were alleged to have sponsored the protest, whose accounts had been frozen the whole time, the CBN had been ordered to unfreeze those accounts. In fact, senior lawyer Femi Falana has said categorically that those accounts were deemed to have been unfrozen since on the 4th of this month. First, when the issue of, when the directive by the CBN came to the fore to say, look, certain banks should freeze those accounts, a lot of persons said this is fundamental human rights violation. But then again, everywhere in the world, every right-thinking government fights to ensure that people do not leverage financial institutions, digital channels to fund any form of insurrection or insurgency or anything untoward. How do we make sense of human rights on the one hand and the government playing its role to ensure that people do not overstep their bounds unnecessarily?
Thank you, thank you, ITV, for always keeping the people informed. Patrick Henry did say once that to guarantee the collective freedoms of the people, we must ensure that the actions and inactions of government is not shrouded in secrecy. So when we have engagements like this, it sensitizes its people, and then people know the limits of government and then the strength of government. And it's important that we know this because government is for the people. The Endsars protest, we followed it very keenly. Some of us didn't participate in it because that we thought that
as a veteran,
yeah, of some sort, all right. Because I told myself, when some people were telling me, I said, I think that maybe if I counted the last 15 years, I probably have been part and led protests, at least conservative, maybe like 1,000, all right. So we paid our dues in that particular regard, but we're watching it. And for me, of fundamental interest is that there's a cause. And I'm saying so because David in the Bible was asked by his father to go give food to his brothers who were in the war front. When he got there, he heard the ranting of Goliath, and he felt provoked to say, why should this guy be talking so bombastically and nobody is able to confront him? And he says, look, I can deal with this guy. And his brother got a little bit upset about it. I said, look, I know you're hot tonight. That's what you just be. And the guy said, look, come on now. But there's a cost now. This guy is threatening to annihilate the whole of Israel, and everybody seems frightened. So if somebody can deal with, this hydra-headed monster, it's enough for the betterment of everybody. Why are you feeling competitive about it? But what did there's a cost? People gathered at Lekki toll gate, and they didn't just gather. It wasn't a secret thing, all right? All over the world, people have a right of protest. I'm sure that the lawyer will tell us, I'm sure it's around the sections 36, 37, and thereabout, yes, of fundamental human rights. People have a right of association,
right?
All right? And then people have a right to express, their grounds. Right? Because it was the same Patrick Henry that said that there are two institutions, that there are two problems that the people have, criminals and government. For criminals, we know that this is a crime. But for government, except to use the law and the constitution to rein government in position, we may likely now have government becoming a legitimate version of criminals. Because if you put guns in a man's hand who doesn't operate, a police officer, for instance, who doesn't operate by rules of engagement, that police officer, because he has the right to hold the gun, he has the legitimate use of force, can even be worse than a criminal, because you identify a criminal and realize that you have a problem with it. Unfortunately, in this part of the world, the government is becoming the problem, of the people, because the government is not providing solutions. People felt agitated. A couple of young men were manhandled, ruffled, killed, and we can now begin to list the challenges that people have had with police. Fortunately, there are judicial panel of inquiries across the country, looking at some of these issues, and we hope that it won't be like one of those panel of inquiries. We hope that independently states can come up with recommendations for federal government that will better the lives of. But people in the open were agitating on a daily basis, asking for the end of SARS, but they moved from Endsars movement to asking for better governance, essentially. And better governance, better governance pays everybody, both the governed and the, both and the governors.
Right.
All right. And so, and there was nothing secret about it. Unfortunately, our leadership in this world do not know that in most revolutions, if you like to use that word, they are sponsored by the elite. The reason is because things, the chicken comes home to roost, and then the elite themselves feel unsafe. You can only raise the walls of your house to a particular extent, but there are people who are still going to scale it. Even in America, we see people scaling, higher fences. So when insecurity, when government becomes so lethargic and lackadaisical, and then even the rich become threatened, what do the rich do? They take part of the money that they have, acquired legitimately or illegitimately, and they put it in a struggle, because they know that in the final analysis, that struggle is going to empower the people more. And when the people are empowered, their own, whatever they have acquired, is safe. Because once there is general agitation, nobody is safe anymore.
Right.
I hear that, there are certain places in Bayelsa State, for instance, if you have, if your convoy of cars is too long, people are going to stop you and say, look, what are you doing with all of this convoy of cars? So when the rich begin to realize that it looks like insecurity is getting home, what they do is that they begin to push money to civil society activists, they begin to push money to human rights activists, not to bribe them, to say, look, you guys need to start to protest. I've had such issues, several times, where some persons come and say, look, this thing is not right, but we cannot go out there and protest. Please, can you help us, do this? Look at the kind of support, look at the kind of logistics that we have. Even media houses collaborate with civil society. And say, look, we need to fight these things, and that is what happened at the level of the Endsars movement. But typical of Nigerian leadership, instead of us to pursue the substance,
the issues that were raised,
we go about looking for how to use the barrel, how to use force, how to use the instrumentation of government to quell all such seeming insurrections. Unfortunately for us, what we have done is just to postpone, the evil day, because if the agitations are not catered for today, they're going to find expression, if not in my generation, in another generation. That's why people say evil done against man, an injustice to man will be dealt with, if not in this generation, in the next generation, if not by God, if not by man, but by God. Look at what the Turkish Prime Minister did upon the Jasmine Revolution, the Tahrir Square, the Middle East. When the guy saw the things that were happening, what did he quickly do? He moved into, he looked at his society, he looked at his country. Before the wind blows him, he decided to decentralize government by himself and engage popular programs that will empower the people. And then the wind didn't blow into his country. So we are just, it's just, it's an attempt to cow the people. It's an attempt to suppress the voice, of the oppressed. And if you can only succeed in doing it now, after a while, like what happened to Sashiso, the Romanian emperor, he's used to bombastic speeches, and he was speaking of in one of those events, and one old man just got up and said, liar, in a crowd. Everyone was quiet, nobody dares Sashiso. And the man seemed to be unruffled and continued the speech. By the time the woman got up again, 10 people joined her. And then it was 10 people now saying liar. And the man just, well, it's one of those things, it happens. But when the woman was going to get up after 10 minutes again, it increased to 100. Before Sashiso knew what was happening, the whole crowd was saying, liar, liar, liar. History has it that the man eventually went to hang himself on an electric pole, because legitimacy is acceptance by the people. Once the people do not accept you anymore, there's nothing that you can do. There's nothing that you can do to please them. So what government should be looking at is, like I began by saying, like David said, let's say cost. Why did people gather at Lekki? Yes. Instead of dealing with that, we think that if we intimidate the people who provided, the funding, we can nip in the bud such insurrection. It's a mirage. It will happen, sometime. Do not forget that the likes of Tinubu in the days of Nadeko and a couple of even people who are in government today use their resources, both local and international, to fund campaigns against the military. Even in Jonathan's time, people use their resources to fund serious campaigns against President Goodluck Ebele, and the heavens, do not fall.
Let's talk to the only learned man in our midst this morning, Barrister Ejiofor. The CBN is a regulatory institution, all right? Yes. And of course, there's an act establishing the CBN. Yes. But does that give a regulatory, as it were, agency boundless or unlimited latitude to pull off certain actions by way of directives, such as we have seen with this Endsars protest and the freezing of bank accounts?
Well, the protest arose immediately after the lockdown was eased. The trauma of the lockdown was still impacting on the people, especially the youth, who are the larger population of Nigerians.
Right.
It was impacting on us when that spark came. And when the spark came, it was more or less like a faint sibilant sound. It was a harmless thing, a protest. The campaigners were not intending to take laws into their hands and begin to do things that are wrong. But along the line, the reaction from government prompted hoodlums who now use their imaginations as barbarians to begin to scuttle the idea of the campaign. It was at that point that the government seemed to have seen the efficiency of the campaigners and the activists. For the first time in Nigeria, you see the youth organizing themselves on a scale that the government has never seen before. Even the government were not so efficient. There was what you call free helplines from lawyers, from medical, from all aspects. People were donating money, and because of the use of force at that point, reactions across the world became spontaneous. They were reacting and they did not like it. And so the reaction was that they were now supporting and solidarizing with the campaigners and the protesters. At that point, you should expect that the government will become agitated. If a group of persons who have no office, who have no structure of governance, will be able to organize themselves across the Federation of Nigeria on that scale, efficiently, accounting for everything, sitting there and protesting, asking for justice. They were merely asking for justice. The youth were asking for existence. They are asking for the reform of our social system. That is what the youth were asking for at that point in time, because it has blossomed beyond even the Endsars. What was the Endsars was just a spark of the, and so the government became agitated and they were scared. Let me put it clearly. The government was no longer comfortable. They felt that the insurrection, or whatever we may call it at this point now, was dovetailing towards a coup or overthrow of government.
But actually, any government would be concerned at that point.
So the desperation made them to begin to push for other means. I think they found a legal means, but politically it was not right. Legally it was justified because by the provisions of the CBN Act, Establishment Act of 2007, by Section 2, the CBN has the power to do what it did. What they did first was to begin to give directives to the banks.
Right.
Post no debit on so and so accounts. People they reasonably suspected that were getting money through money laundering and other forms of transfers of those wire money. And so they supposed no debit on those accounts. And they went further to seek legal backing by approaching the court to ask for an interim court order. They filed a motion through their lawyer. They filed a motion, an ex parte application through their lawyer, and the lawyer successfully argued his application and it was granted. What they sought was 180 days to freeze this account of the campaigners so that they can do investigation and inquiries if they were really getting money from sources that are money laundering or terrorism financing. But the court in its wisdom granted 90 days on 4th of November 2020, which was due to expire on the 4th of February 2021.
Right.
In itself, if nothing else was done by that very act, by 4th of October of February 2021,
no debit order should be
it
lifted.
would have just fizzled out on its own. But I think in our Nigerian way of doing things, we just don't follow the law or the rule of law as it should be. So it became necessary that the people should approach the court again. But before then, there was a rapport between the counsel to CBN and the counsel to the defendants. Femi Folano for the defendants and Aondoaka for the CBN. Right. And there was, and it has, okay, let's withdraw this suit, and that was what they did. By now, I should think that the accounts of the 20 protesters must have been unfrozen so that they can operate. But going from there, we should be looking at the consequence of what happened. Right. There are consequences. Much as we agree that the Central Bank of Nigeria have the powers under the Banks and Other Financial Institution Act to regulate the banks, sometimes you have to look at the political terrain, the environment, to begin to take certain actions. That would have even escalated the issue even more.
The idea of freezing those accounts.
Yes, it's not that other mechanisms were put in place to begin to calm down people, because the restiveness has gone beyond the scale that you are saying, you can say you want to begin to. It was not necessary at that point in time. If there was anything at all, the bank would have done is to monitor those accounts. And they have the mechanisms through the commercial banks or other financial to monitor these accounts, and not just to take that extreme action, and but they approach it legally. So to that extent, you cannot say that it was a breach of the right. It was a court order. But the court in its wisdom, rather than grant 180 days, granted 90 days. And 90 days expired 4th of February 2021. That is where we are right now. Okay. But we have lessons to learn from that experience.
I want us to talk about those lessons in a bit. One of which is, I mean, I'm talking to you now, Reverend Lou Martins. A lot of persons are saying, going forward, protests, peaceful demonstrations in this country will never remain the same again, because the Endsars protest has been called several things: watershed, turning points, and so on and so forth. There's already a disruption in the way we understand the concept of protest and peaceful demonstrations in this country now, as occasioned by the Endsars protests. Do you share those sentiments?
Oh, absolutely. And like my colleague here has said, it was one of the most organized protests that, especially at that scale, all right? It started like a raindrop, and then after a while it became torrents. But the beauty of it is that there was no defined leadership. Now, maybe that was a strength or a weakness, because even the ants have some kind of leadership, right? So if you have such a crowd as behemoth as that is, and then you do not now have a leadership, it becomes amorphous. What the protesters were trying to guide against was, they were trying to guide against sellouts. That's why the likes of Omoyele Sowore identified with them. They booed him, not because they have any personal grounds with him, but they didn't want any notable face, somebody who can go behind the scene and then either will compromise or can be intimidated. You remember there was a time that enough is enough. A couple of guys in Abuja came together.
Adeya and Jew, Charlie Boy and Co.
And they put a protest together. And then our friend Two-Face put his face on it. And the fact that Two-Face endorsed it, and even said he was going to be physically present, he got international recognition, and everybody was talking about it. I was in that protest. Eventually, a few days to it, the security agencies either cornered or boxed Two-Face to a corner. In the final analysis, Two-Face did not show up, and that reduced the scale of that protest. I was there. I participated in it. Omoyele Sowore came on it, and Charlie, at least at the Lagos, so he went on simultaneously in Lagos and in Abuja. So to forestall such a thing, the guys say, look, we're not going to have any defined leadership, at least not a leadership that has a face. They have a leadership that is faceless, because you couldn't have been able to organize for those kind of things if people, if there wasn't somebody pulling the strings, behind the corner. So I agree that it has changed how protests, will be held. But more importantly, I hope that it has awoken the consciousness of the young people. Do you see I'm saying I hope? It's because I'm told that on Saturday here, some people had called for a reenactment. They say, okay, let's go back
to Lekki targets.
But you find out that there is a counter-protest. Usually, people who organize the counter-protest are government. Government will organize a counter-protest in the same location. Some people are saying that protest is called Save Lagos protest. So the idea is, you say you have a right to gather at toll gates. You know the toll gate has to, for some people this side is an exit, the other, for some people this side is an entrance, depending on where you know you're coming from. So if we gather at this side, some people will gather at this side. So if anti gather here and pro gather here, government will eventually come and say, look, because of the potential of breakout of law and order, because of the fracas that will take place there, they cannot allow people gathered there. You know.
So you find a way to disperse them.
Yeah, they find a way to disperse them. So that's what usually government does. By the time you know Abacha wanted to you know transmogrify to a civilian dictator, there was a 1 million man march that was organized by Ekanu in Abuja, and then by the time Ifala and them organized a 5 million man march, you know, in Lagos. So we're hoping that this will bring an eternal consciousness to, especially the Nigerian people. The fallout of the Endsars, I haven't seen much of it. That's my own humble logo marking. Outside the putting together of the judicial panel of inquiry, in which case what has happened is that most of the people who were visible at the Endsars have been co-opted into the judicial panel, you know, of inquiry. So if you have a smart governor, for instance, what does he do? He brings the heads, some of the people that they have identified, puts them into the judicial panel of inquiry, and pays them sumptuously. And when you are paid sumptuously, you have become part, if you like, of the ruling class. So if you want to reenact that thing, who are the people that are going to, you know, participate, you know, in it? But government, like he said, should learn lessons falling out of this. There's no stopping something. There's no stopping an idea whose time has come. If the time had come, the time, you know, has come, and there's nothing that you can really do about it. When people say that the pen is mightier than the sword, they understand, you know, what they are talking about. Even Bible says in Genesis chapter 3, God, in Genesis chapter 11, it says, look at the language of these people. It says their language is one. See, there's now nothing that anybody can do to stop them. So what do? Let's confound their language. This is God's commentary. So what God is saying in himself is that as long as people are united, he himself as God is incapacitated. So the first thing you should do for them is to make them sing discordant tunes, is to make them speak different languages. The moment they make them speak different languages, they, you know, will move out. So people need to be careful, because what has already happened is that people have been pulled out. What will happen, and then some people have been intimidated. It's unlikely that the 20 people whose bank accounts have now were frozen have now been lifted. Incidentally, I know some of them. It's unlikely that they are going to be excited getting involved, you know, any longer. So except they have, and then what government has done by that element of intimidation, because it was my friend Osin Osakwe that used to say, and still says, that it is better to have the power of an elephant and use it as an ant than to have the power of an ant and to use it as an elephant. In this particular case, what government is doing is that it has the power of an elephant and is using it as an elephant to the extent that it wants to intimidate people, so that going forward, if you say you want to sponsor a protest, there you will be telling yourself that there are consequences to it. But if the bird decides, the hunter decides to shoot without missing, the bird may also decide that it will fly without petting. What people may do going forward, they may decide not to keep money in the banks anymore. We know people who don't keep money in the banks anymore. They convert it to crypto. They convert it to a dollar, knowing that the dollar is even almost better now to have money in dollars than to have it in landed property, because the way dollar is increasing is not. It is higher than the way the land. Pace of it pays more. The dividend is higher. If you bought a land, if you bought a land for $1 million, you know, dollars last year, and you had $1 million cash in your house,
within the same time,
by the time you bring two of them out now, what you would get,
there's disparity in value.
There's disparity in value clearly. So some people may just keep, you know, money at home and decide that because of, you know, some things, they will have slush funds that they can use, you know, to sponsor such things. So government should be able to learn a lesson, and instead of cutting out the leaves, because the tree would grow again, government should look at what are the people saying. As we speak now, police is back on, you know, the street, happily so, but we still are hearing and seeing instances of police brutality. So it doesn't look like they have learned their lessons. Whether the people will be able to galvanize themselves, unfortunately, is that if you don't provide solution from top down, if the solution comes from bottom up, it's difficult to control. That's what's happening in Libya. That's what's happening, in Egypt. So if the government doesn't look at what the people are agitated about, it's like your wife. If your wife cannot talk to you, I guarantee you that she will talk to her friends. I guarantee you that she will talk to other people. So you'll be hearing stories about your own family outside from somebody who should be talking to you, because you haven't created the communication line for your wife to be able to freely talk to you without intimidation. People are going out there to talk because they have attempted to let government know these are our issues, and government has paid deaf ears, and government doesn't care. So if these things continue to swell up from bottom up, it means that the people have owned the process. And when the people own the process, you have pockets of leadership across the country, and those pockets of leadership are going to be difficult to harness together. Government will lose grip. And if government loses grip, the Bible says that it came to pass that the people had no leadership, and they did what was right, in their side. So government should be proactive enough to look at the fundamental, issues, and then to attempt to see how we can deal, with these issues going forward, so that agitations will reduce, so that people will not talk about going back to regroup at Lekki toll gate.
All right, thank you. Let's talk about international as it were, intervention, Barrister Ejiofor. By way of coincidence, the U.S. Presidential election campaigns were on. I mean, they were at their peak, actually, by the time that protest was on here. You probably recall that people like the presidential candidate, the then presidential candidate, who is now the president of the United States, Joe Biden, reached out to the Nigerian government, spoke up about the issue. His vice, Kamala Harris, did the same thing. So you had international political figures from across the globe also talking and speaking up about the Endsars protest. Of course, Nigerians across the globe, Nigerians in diaspora, they also reached out, carried placards, did their own kind of, as it were, peaceful protests or demonstration wherever they are across the world. To what extent did all of those, as it were, efforts influence the direction of that protest and the outcome we've seen today as it stands?
I think across the world, they saw what happened was as an attack on democracy. And there is nowhere in a civilized world, where people take kindly to any breach of our democratic rights or tenets. What happened in Nigeria was an intimidation. They tried to intimidate the campaigners and the activists and those who were in support. And the civilized world felt that this is just a peaceful protest. People are bearing their mind, they are exercising their constitutional rights. To that extent, you should give them freedom. After all, you have the Black Lives Matter campaign in America. And they managed even the tension that arose with it, and even some of the bloody incidents. Why couldn't we have managed it? Why couldn't our government have done the same thing? And that was what the international community and the whole world were looking at. I said, what's wrong? Why are you using the taxpayers' money to empower the security men to kill your own people? It is unheard of. You turn your gun against your people when you have criminals who are in Sambisa forest and you are killing innocent citizens. The offense human sense is that it should happen at all in Nigeria. And that was where, that's why I say that it was mishandled at that point. Right. It was mishandled at that point, but at all ends, so both the protesters and all that, because I did explain that it was hijacked by some imaginative barbarians who now went to begin to break into prisons and do things. But then it also exposed the wickedness of government. Here you have palliative, people are hungry. During the so-called COVID-19 lockdown, and you stack food that were rotting away in warehouses, and you tag them that they are palliatives, and people are hungry. In fact, I don't know, the government is the cause of that protest. It's the cause of the problem, because if these palliatives were on ground and they were evenly distributed, I guess the youth would have been less restive. They would have had the ease of mind to even absorb things. But besides, this tension between our youth and the police has been on. But you know, because of those tension of lockdown and all that, it became a spark. It now looked as if the police are the worst institution we have. They are not. What you see in the police is what you see in every other institution. They are as good as other institutions and as bad as them.
So what singles out the police, by the way?
What singles out? Because they are directly in the front line. They interface with the people. As you walk across the road, as you drive through it, you see policemen. You go and make complaint. You see policemen. They come to make inquiry in your house that your attention is still there. You see policemen, so they are directly on the front line. It's not as if they are worse off. In fact, I pity them because whatever damages that have done, we have sent the messages across quite all right. But it will take a long time to rebuild both the properties and the psychological trauma that many people have passed through during that experience. It is a lesson that government must learn. Listening to my colleague here, I feel so pained that we talk so much here and government don't listen. It appears we just come here to entertain ourselves. It's unfortunate. Government should listen to people. We articulate the views of people and bring it here for government to hear. You do something about it so that tomorrow this thing will not recur. Somebody
incidentally said government has quote unquote 2 ears and you have 200 million Nigerians. So do they have the capacity to listen?
In that case, they should listen at all. Are they listening? That is even the question. Who are they listening to? To themselves? When you criticize government, you become an enemy of the government. It shouldn't be so. We have what you call constructive criticism. You should look at those criticisms and then work with it. You don't just try and do the kind of things we do. You see call it palliative anyway. You just come here and say, okay, this is you bring in some palliative measures to quell the restiveness, and then we just continue as it was before. We can't go on like this. That is what the youth are clamoring for. They are clamoring for social change.
Let's talk about that.
They are looking at their existence, that the future, you say, is in the hands of the youth. How do they make this change to become a reality at that time? Otherwise, we will ruin the society and leave them in trouble.
Many states in the country were affected adversely by that protest. Lagos took perhaps, obviously the highest hits. According to the Lagos State Governor, Governor Sanwo-Olu said Lagos would need something in the neighborhood of ₦1 trillion to rebuild, given the size of destruction, yes, that the state had recorded. And by way of coincidence, too, it's interesting to know that the budget of Lagos for 2021 is just around the same amount. That already it's a challenge in itself, isn't it?
It is. You can even take it from there and then go to the other aspects, that the inflow of investment in Nigeria stopped, and now it is trickling. It is no longer flowing. You remember also we closed our borders at that point in time, around that same time. We closed our border. Right. So there was nothing really happening. People were hungry. Prices of things were going up, skyrocketing every day. People could not afford basic things. The rice that we say we produce in Nigeria, we could not afford. So many things were going wrong. The capital market was comatose. So many things were going wrong. But from there, you look at it from some positives. Our police now dress better. You know, when you see our policemen, they say they are SARS, they look like miscreants. You cannot differentiate the policemen and others, but now they are well dressed. That to me is a positive.
It's an improvement, right?
Secondly, they are more civilized now. Their attitude has changed. I think there's been a lot of sensitization and orientation for them to begin to change their attitude. That itself is positive. If we don't highlight those points here, it will look as if nobody is recognizing the little things that are going to reform. And we want also make the Nigerian government to be responsible to its duties, to the policemen. We are talking about uniform. The police buy their uniform. The average Nigerian policeman pays for his uniform. He pays for nearly everything, the kits he wears. Even for them to even drive their vehicle, they need fuel. Who provides the fuel? Nobody. Nobody is talking about it. What of their salary? What of accidents and issues maybe resulting to death and physical injuries? Nobody is talking about it. So you have a lot of frustrated persons operating as policemen, and then you keep blaming the police for the things they do. We just have to reform our system. That is the way forward. That's why I'm saying that we are singling out the police as if they are the real they are the main problem. They are not. Even the politicians are worse. Go to the civil service, the same. So we just have to.
Incidentally, those in the civil service do not have a uniform. Barrister Jofo, you have made a very strong point, especially on behalf of the policeman, even though you are not in the police. Let's talk about, as we wrap up now, gentlemen, Reverend Lou Martins, a lot of persons are saying the CBN definitely used certain algorithms to be able to identify those they thought were sponsoring the Endsars protest, and as such, going forward, shut down their accounts or freeze their accounts. They are saying, can't you replicate the same metrics in identifying those sponsoring insurgency, kidnapping, and all criminal activities against the Nigerian state? Is it not possible?
You know, sometimes what we do in this part of the world, that we cut off our nose to spite our face and still think that...
And ultimately, it still hurts.
Yes, and we think that we're going to look the same way. We have maybe leadership in this country, they probably underrate followership. They don't think that we think. They don't think that we are seeing some of these issues. Ali Ndume represents, is it Borno North now?
Yes.
And the guys constantly say that federal government knows the sponsors of Boko Haram. Constantly. He's not the only person. There are a couple of people who have constantly, said so. We have heard within the ambit of Bush Radio here that government themselves have paid ransom to
insurgents.
Yes, to insurgents. And it's no longer a rumor, it's not even Bush Radio. The governor of Kaduna State, Madam Nasser El-Rufai, did say once that they had to pay off some of these guys so that some of these attacks and killings can stop. So clearly, and then people are dealing across the arms, markets, all right? What did government now decide to do in this particular instance? Typical of what Nigerian government does. With the panic, mode, and then we just take anyhow decisions. We decided to say, okay, let's enter into, let's ban cryptocurrency. Now, CBN is recanting to say, okay, we didn't say ban, we're just issuing an advisory. And I quite agree with you. If you can use some of these instances, why can't we be more intelligent in our approach? It is the same way too that policing, you see police officers, especially if you travel along the highway. When I say I'm heartbroken, you see logs of wood on the road. I'm wondering, in this, okay, somebody who now wants to do something terrible will see traffic will build from where we are now, probably to Uniben, and then he has an idea that
there's a checkpoint.
Yeah, the checkpoint, and you think that he's still going to go through that checkpoint in spite of the nefarious activities that he's carrying out. So we don't do intelligent things in this part of the country. If you can track the activities of people who you say who are sponsoring, who sponsored the
Endsars protest.
And if you look at it, with all due respect, I studied the list. I know a couple of people personally. I didn't quite see the name of any northern character there. The bulk of the people that I saw, at least 90% of it, were people from the south.
Those whose accounts were frozen.
Those whose accounts were frozen. I just wanted to look at it. I didn't see many. So it means that either that the northern elements didn't believe in the Endsars protest, and indeed they didn't believe in it, because while we were talking about banning Endsars here, northern governors had several meetings where they were extolling and they wanted the Endsars thing to and they were extolling the formation of Endsars and thought that there was nothing absolutely wrong, with Endsars. Now, these actions like this drive deeper the wedges of north-south dichotomy. If we see there's a problem and then we take action down south, the north-south doesn't take action. Before you know what's happening, agencies of government move in and take prompt action against those who are pro that activity. But if it is those who are anti the activities, government doesn't take such action. Look at the Mieti Allah, for instance, who are boastfully. They're not even faceless. They have their leadership, and several other organizations, several of them have come up to take responsibility, sometimes on live television, for certain action that some of their members have taken. So they're not even faceless people. And nobody has taken action against some of those elements. But if something happens and then we're and it looks like it is from is a particular part of the country, people don't take actions against it. So I agree that government can use whatever parameters is used as CB, and this is usually my challenge. Sometimes the people who are what we call pro-north, we have some southerners who are more pro-north than the northerners themselves. And because I'm saying so because I'm one task to the actions of this particular CBN governor. So if we are serious, we should use the same methodologies across board. What you use to track the people who are sponsoring Endsars should be used to track the people who are not just sponsoring Boko Haram, but who are also profiting from this war. If you go across Benin City, some of the major structures there are the most of people who are building. There's one or two far from. It's a humongous structure. I hear that it's being owned by either a serving or a retired military officer. So what it means is that this war against insurgency is profiting certain persons, and at any rate all over the world war is profitable. So it means that there is where money is going to. So if you can use those algorithms as you call it to track those who are sponsoring, it is expected that we'll also look at those who are sponsoring Boko Haram, which is being with us, but nothing substantial has come out of it. And when government begins to act like this, it tells the people directly or indirectly that it is not serious. And if government is not serious, how does he expect, like he's saying, how do you expect the police to be serious when
there's no leadership from the top?
I met a police officer who says that the overhead in the impress, the overhead for an average police station is 6,500 naira a month. 6,500 naira a month. And then you expect that the police will operate independently. If I have the opportunity, I will probably even give the police formation the award of being the best performing institution, because they are performing magic
within their limited resources.
I heard at the police college, I heard the provost of the police college say what is budgeted per meal is per day is 150 naira per person. In other words, 50 naira
for a meal
per meal. I mean, he was saying it on television. So if within that, police is still able to do what they are doing. I doff my cap in absentia.
Hopefully we should have a full-fledged program dedicated to police and policing issues real soon. But in the meantime, 1 minute, Barrister Ejiofor, just for 1 minute. A lot of persons say this order, this court order for the accounts of these alleged sponsors of the Endsars protest to be defrozen is a good one. However, we seem to be a country with a history of not obeying court orders. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't think the Central Bank of Nigeria was compelled to seek to withdraw
because of the mutual agreement between both sides.
There was already a rapport between the parties and especially between the two councils and the CBN disposition.
Okay.
And in the spirit of reconciliation, you know that so many panels have been set up to look into the cause and how we can be able to resolve the issues.
Right.
It will be inappropriate at this point to begin to hold on to legal when we have this panel that want to resolve issues. Like you know, the Oputa panel, we come together and talk to ourselves and see how it happened in South Africa. It's just that when we do things here, we don't follow it through. That is the problem we have. Otherwise, it was a good idea, and I think by now, those accounts will start.
Speaking of reconciliation, by the way, a lot of persons are saying there are two models Nigerians, Nigeria as a government should probably look at, South Africa and Rwanda, for instance. But again, that's a discussion for another day altogether. Gentlemen, Reverend Olu Martins and Barrister Peter Ejiofor, we do deeply appreciate your coming on the program this morning.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, we're taking a break at this point now. We're back to wrap up in a bit. Stay with me.